We know who's owned the Big 12, but they're gone. Big 12 all-time rankings next at the Voice of College Football. We are breaking down all the programs in college football, and we are doing so all time and providing our rankings conference by conference. Check out the ACC and, yes, the Pac-12. We have signed and sealed and delivered the Pac-12's final rankings right here at the Voice of College Football. Appreciate you stopping by for the best in discussion, debate, and analysis. We move on to the Big 12, and please check out the first video that was posted concerning the Pac-12 because we outlined all the various categories, why we chose those categories, and how the system works. But you will see the categories because we will lay them out. Oklahoma and Texas are gone. We will include them in the Big 12 because, of course, we're looking at program rankings. And those two programs have yet to step on the field for another conference, the SEC. So we might as well throw them into the mix, along with the programs entering the Big 12. So enter Colorado, back after a 10-plus year hiatus. Utah, Arizona, and Arizona State. How do the programs stack up? This is an exhaustive analysis. Buckle up. Here we go. Let's start with winning percentage, where Oklahoma has been far and away the best program all time in the Big 12 Conference with a 725 winning percentage. Texas also exceeds the 70% winning percentage, and then look at that drop. It goes all the way down to 599, so there's no 60% winning programs in the Big 12 left over from the previous Big 12 because the next two schools are newcomers from the Pac-12 in Arizona State and Utah. West Virginia, also fairly new to the Big 12, just here in the last 12 football seasons at 596. BYU, of course, a newcomer in 2023, very successful as an independent throughout the 80s, 90s, and 2000s. There is Colorado, of course, a former member of the Big 12, UCF, a new entry, and of course, the newest of all these programs by far. UCF didn't start playing football until 1997. They were an independent, they were in the MAC, they were in the American Conference, and now they make it up to the Power Four. And on down the line, you see that there are only 3 of these teams out of all these programs, so that would be 16 plus Oklahoma and Texas, 18 programs that are under 50% winning percentage all time. So these are pretty bad, awful football programs all time in Kansas, Kansas State, and Iowa State. But consider, why are there so many teams above 50%? Because you would think that they all play each other. However, of course, this includes FCS and Group of 5 games in which the Power 4 wins 90+% of the time. So let's check out what's happened recently in winning percentage. Over the 10-year run of the college football playoff era starting in 2014, Oklahoma has been by far the dominant program in the Big 12. They made the playoffs in 2015, 17, 18, also in 2019 as well. And of course, even their down seasons were 10-2 under Lincoln Riley. So at 102-29, by far, by 30 games, better than Texas. We see Utah, that, of course, won Pac-12 championships 3 times and went to a couple Rose Bowls at 86-40. We see that UCF has been strong, but, of course, those numbers are compiled as a group of 5 with a much easier schedule. So, of course, you've got to take into consideration that concerning BYU, UCF, Houston, and Cincinnati. And, of course, the Bearcats, the other program here that made the college football playoff in 2021. TCU did in 2022, and they've been a strong program with, of course, a good run under Gary Patterson in 2014 and 15, going to the Big 12 championship game in 2017. K-State has been consistently good under Bill Snyder and now Chris Kleiman, although not as dominant over the last 10 years as they were strong in the late 1990s into the 2000s. There we see Matt Campbell's teams have been competitive more so than they've been in the past, and we will see those numbers very, very soon as we transition to the 21st century. So this is 2001 on. And again, Oklahoma just consistently strong. 242-63, one of the best records in all of college football. We will see at the end of this series how that stacks up against the likes of Alabama, Ohio State. Those are the first 2 that come to mind, of course, in terms of dominance in the 21st century. Texas at 203-90. Much of that work done, of course, by Mack Brown and going to BCS championship games in 2005 and 2009. Arizona State had a pretty good run in there under Todd Graham in particular. Utah, of course, Kyle Whittingham has been the coach since 2005 and took over for Urban Meyer, who led an undefeated Utes team. So the Utes have now been a major player on the landscape of college football now for 20 years. I think in West Virginia's case, they sometimes get discarded and forgotten as a pretty major player in college football. They've been consistently in the rankings, as we will see coming up here soon. There again, we see TCU strong at 202-89. Much of that work done in the WAC conference before moving on to the Power Four. And, of course, Gary Patterson's responsible for almost all of that. Mike Gundy's had a great run at Oklahoma State. And Oklahoma State prior to Mike Gundy, Les Miles, of course, had a decent run. It's not been much of a football program before that. Baylor has been all over the place, up and down, up and down. They've had tremendous seasons in 2013 and 14, and most recently in winning the Big 12 in 2021. But overall, 7 games under 500 during this century. Iowa State way down, and you see Kansas, of course, could barely win a football game from the time of those Mark Mangino teams in the late 2000s. 2007, of course, was the high point at 12-1, and then up until just the last couple of years with Lance Leipold, Kansas was the worst program in college football. Let's back it up to 1970, and we know Texas and Oklahoma just clearly so dominant, more so than anybody in this conference. And the conference had so many different configurations, and these teams were scattered all over the place when we go back to 1970 with a core in the Southwest Conference, a core of teams in the Big 12, and then others were independents like West Virginia and BYU, and of course UCF didn't even exist prior to 1997. You see the numbers there, and you see the strong dominance by Oklahoma and Texas, and on down the line. West Virginia's had a nice run with over 400 wins. Again, BYU and their schedule has to be taken into consideration. They certainly have gone out and tried to schedule tough teams, but of course not playing in a conference. They have been relegated to a lot of group of 5 games in October and November in particular. The AP poll launched in 1936, and while it is extremely flawed in particular seasons concerning particular teams, if you take it in its entirety, it gives us a pretty good snapshot of college football power over the last 90 years. So let's give it a look, because there's an AP poll point system that pretty much tells us a lot about who has been strong throughout college football. And, of course, it's been Oklahoma with over 1,100 points. Look at the gap between OU and Texas. This is a huge rivalry, of course, one of the best in college football. But Oklahoma has just been so much more consistent. And this gap has widened, certainly, since Mack Brown left Texas. And the Horns were basically in the wilderness until last season. Oklahoma dominated the Big 12, and we will see how that shows up in the conference championships. Other than those two, there's a big drop-off because most of these programs have not been good programs for the entirety of their existence. TCU, of course, just in the last 20 years has picked up their poll points, and West Virginia's been really strong, but it's not reflected there that much because prior to Don Nehlen, West Virginia was nowhere to be found. They had a good run in the 80s, and they've popped up here and there. But you also see Colorado, of course. How good were they under Bill McCartney? That's when they gained most of their AP poll points. Oklahoma State under Mike Gundy has been consistently an 8-win, 9-win football program that's been in the bottom half of the top 25 and picked up many of those points that you see there. It's strange to see Utah way down the list because they've been so successful in a consistent top 25 program over the last 20 years. But before that, nowhere to be found. UCF, again, we've got to consider that they just entered college football in 1997 and are playing serious catch-up in regards to these all-time compilations. The final AP rankings can also be displayed this way. How many times did these teams finish ranked in their history? How many times in the top 10? How many times in the top 5? Oklahoma, 62 seasons ranked. And again, it's going to be interesting to see how that compares against the other blue bloods in college football. 45 times in the top 10, 33 times in the top 5. Now, Texas, even though they lag behind with 11 less ranked seasons and 28 compared to the 45 top 10 finishes, so Oklahoma, the much better AP team in the AP poll rankings than Texas overall. But when Texas does reach the top 10, it's typically in the top 5 with 22 appearances in the top 5 in America. After that, TCU's been pretty strong there with 21 ranked teams, and most of those in the last 20 or 25 years under Gary Patterson. West Virginia's been fairly consistent with some really good teams, but man, what a drop-off after Oklahoma and Texas, and this doesn't bode well for the conference going forward, of course, in playing among the nation's elite. Kansas State was in the abyss forever, and of course Bill Snyder built that program and made it what it's been. Baylor has finished in the top 25 16 times. There you see Colorado and BYU. Of course, they each have a distinction that most teams in the Big 12 do not have. They've won national championships in 1984 and 1990, respectively. Those Utah finishes have come in the last 15 or 20 years. And there you see a number of programs that have yet to finish in the top 5 ever in the history of the programs. Look at Texas Tech, has never finished in the top 10, let alone the top 5. Iowa State finished in the top 10 just recently here in 2020 in a truncated season after they won the Fiesta Bowl and have never finished in the top 5. Kansas has never finished in the top 5 in America. We tend to discard bowl results because, of course, of opt-outs and because of so much attention being given to the college football playoff, and understandably so. But over the course of college football history, bowl results have been extremely important. So we're going to look at bowl wins overall, but we're also going to isolate and give more credit to major bowl wins because, of course, you can play a 6-6 team in the postseason. You can play a 11 or 12 win team in the postseason. So we're going to focus on major bowl wins, but let's look at the overall bowl win totals for these teams in the Big 12. And Walla, once again, Oklahoma and Texas are way out in front with 31 bowl victories. Oklahoma State has 21 bowl victories, although we're going to find out very few of those have been major bowl wins. Arizona State's been pretty strong, along with Utah, West Virginia, BYU, all with 17, as well as Texas Tech. But Texas Tech has never won a major bowl game. So again, we got to point out the distinction here between major bowl wins and overall bowl wins, because the likes of Texas Tech playing in the Independence Bowl forever, that needs to be recognized, and it is right here. Major bowl wins, and this really separates the teams. Oklahoma 23, Texas 19, and then it's a free fall to find TCU with 7 major bowl wins. And it's funny because for TCU, that goes back to the Sammy Baugh days. And then there's a huge run of nothing for TCU in major bowl play. And of course, they've won some major bowl games under Gary Patterson and now won in the college football playoff against Michigan with Sonny Dykes. And then after that, it's a scattered 3 and 4 here and there. So Oklahoma and Texas, of course, have taken the blue blood out of this conference, and that's seen in all these categories. Whether it be in the Big 8 or now the Big 12, and now they move on to the SEC, we'll see if they can continue it. Oklahoma owns the most conference championships of any school in college football. It's impressive. 50 conference championships. And of course, in recent years, Bob Stoops won a ton. He dominated the conference. And Lincoln Riley won his share as well. 50. Look at that number. 31 for Texas. And these two schools have competed against each other since the mid-1990s because the Big 12 formed in 1996. Before that, Texas was in the Southwest Conference. And now all these other conference championships have to be taken into context. Utah won almost all of its conference championships in Conference USA, the WAC, group of 5 conferences. Colorado as well. Got to take that into consideration. BYU and the like. BYU, of course, in the WAC. West Virginia was an independent for a long time. That's another factor in this that makes the comparison somewhat difficult. Cincinnati out of the Big East as well. And TCU, of course, they were in the WAC. They were in other conferences prior to the Big 12. but that is the rundown. And then, of course, you've got the 4 schools coming in from the Pac Conference, where Arizona only won the Pac-12 once in 1993. Arizona State did not win the bulk of those conference championships in the Pac Conference. They won 14 outside the Pac, only 3 inside the Pac-10 or the Pac-12. And of course, Kansas State and Iowa State are late to the arrival here in terms of conference championships. And Iowa State has not won a conference championship in the Big 12 or the Big 8. You got to go way back to like 1913 when Iowa State won a conference championship. The Big 12 was formed in 1996. Classic first conference championship game with James Brown and Texas upsetting a number 1 Nebraska team. So let's take into consideration when we look at the conference championships within the conference that most of these teams founded the Big 12 in 1996, but a number were added later. Again, we try to make the comparisons on a number of scales so we can measure it and gain a lot of different perspectives here. Added to the Big 12 after 1996, you have 2012 with TCU and with West Virginia. And then the conference was set up until this past fall with the 4 newcomers in 2023. And of course, it becomes a different conference without OU and Texas in 2024. Add the 4 schools from the Pac-12. But let's take this block of time from 1996 through 2023. That's 28 football seasons. Who dominated the Big 12? Guess who? For as good as Texas has been, for most of that time, under Mack Brown in particular, John Mackovic and others, although they've been down, of course, Texas was strong, and the only elite program, the only program that's vied for national championships during this time, just again, underline Oklahoma and how dominant the Sooners have been. Look at this conference championship winning percentage, we will call it. 28 seasons, 14 championships. OU owns the conference half the time. That's crazy. Texas is number 2 with 4 titles in 28 years. And then on down the line, Colorado won a championship in the Big 12 before they took off for the Pac-12. Oklahoma State, of course, won a conference championship as well. That was in 2011. TCU got their championship. And also we've got Baylor with some conference championships as well, 2013, 2014, and the most recent when they beat the Cowboys in the Big 12 championship game a few years ago. And Kansas State under Bill Snyder with 3 conference championships, the one with Chris Kleiman, of course, just here in 2022. Iowa State shutout, 0 for 28. Kansas 0 for 28. And then you've got a number of other teams, Texas Tech, shutout, 0 for 28. Mike Leach could not get it done in regards to a conference championship. And there was a 5-year spurt where there was no conference championship game. So there were some shared championships during that time. But we get to see the percentage of championships, and it just, again, emphasizes OU's dominance. Just guess what the NFL draft looks like. Would it be Oklahoma? Would it be Texas? What do you think? 417 and 368, far ahead of everyone else. Sitting there in the 200s would include the likes of Colorado, Arizona State. We also have Baylor showing up with 249 NFL draft selections. That's pretty impressive considering they outdistanced most of their rivals in the conference that they've competed against, both in the Southwest Conference going way back and in the Big 12 over the last 28 years. You have West Virginia showing up with 199 NFL draft selections and then dragging well behind. Of course, UCF's only been playing football for a couple decades, so they're going to be behind in this category. But there you've got Iowa State in particular as we move on to first round selections. And we'll see that Iowa State basically doesn't even show up, nor does Cincinnati on first round selections, led by Oklahoma 51. Closer in this category, Texas with 48. And then we see a couple schools in the 20s, including Arizona State there with 26. And then it really drops off from there. And there's a number of schools that have been playing football for a long time, participating in the NFL draft, that barely have single digits, let alone double digits, in first round selections. Consensus All-Americans. Guess who's number 1? Guess who's number 2? 82-63. So again, Oklahoma with a huge lead. Texas on a different tier by itself, And then there's the rest of the conference. Colorado shows up rather well in this category with 32. Consensus All-Americans. Guess who's number one? Guess who's number two? Clear number one, clear number two, and then everybody else. OU with 82. Texas with 63. I think we're hurting a lot of Texas fans' feelings with these numbers because it shows a clear distinction here between the two programs all time. Then we've got one program, make it two programs, over 20. Colorado at 32, Oklahoma State at 21, consensus All-Americans, and then everybody else drags behind there. Heisman Trophy winners. Oklahoma is just one off USC's pace with 7, and then it drops off once again considerably. Texas with 2 Heisman Trophy winners, and then all these other schools with 1. BYU, Colorado, Rashaan Salam comes to mind. Ty Detmer, of course. We've got Andre Ware representing Houston. And we've got Oklahoma State with a Heisman Trophy as well, going way, way back. Of course, that was Barry Sanders, arguably the greatest player of all time. And Baylor with a Heisman Trophy with RG3 just here in the last 15 years. We don't just look at Heisman Trophy winners and count those folks. All the positions count. Let's look at all the major award winners. Tight end with the Mackey, wide receiver Biletnikoff, the Lombardi, the Nagurski, the Remington, all the position awards, including the kickers. This is how it stacks up. Guess who? Oklahoma 24, Texas 17. Again, a clear number one, a clear number two, and then it goes down from there. Now, of course, we're dealing with subjective measurements voted on by sports writers. The wins, the bowl wins, all those things, the conference championships, those are objective. These are subjective measurements, but they still give a clear indication and go right in line with who's winning the games. BYU has had 9 award winners on both sides of the football. That's impressive. Arizona, despite not winning many games, as we've seen, 8 award winners on both sides of the football as well. TCU has 7. So what we're doing here at the Voice of College Football is we're running through every conference in the program rankings. When we get done, we are doing a live stream for every conference. Bring your comments, your questions, give me a call, tell me where I missed it, what should have been added. And believe me, I understand certain things could be added, but a database of 1 is only so effective. So we believe it's a damn good system. It's excellent. It's not perfect. I would love to include strength of schedule in particular, but again, we have our limitations. But when we throw it all together, and we will explain the point system at a later date, here's how the points tally up. Oklahoma is number 1 all-time in the Big 12. That is pretty clear to see by the results. So the point system falls right in line with what it should be. 31-41 with a 500-plus point advantage over Texas, and then another huge, enormous drop-off from there. Arizona State strong. Colorado strong in the 1600s. Utah and West Virginia in the 1500s. TCU also eclipsed 1600. Oklahoma State at 1500. And then you're starting to get into some football programs that really have largely been bad more times than they've been good. If you go through the history of these football programs, and then you get down into the likes of Kansas, Kansas State, Iowa State, and others, boy, Kansas State, thank Bill Snyder for anything that you've achieved, because he's done pretty much all of it in lifting Kansas State to a plus 54 over 500 record. Otherwise, it has been atrocious for Kansas State. Then you also have to take into consideration with any kind of the percentages, UCF can be fairly evaluated. But other than that, in terms of compilation, they're going to be near the bottom. But so for UCF to outrank Kansas and Kansas State and Iowa State is incredible when you think about it, because look at all these compilations of totals in which they have no chance. They started in 1997, and they still outrank Kansas State and Iowa State. That's how deplorable those football programs have been. Sorry to hurt the feelings of those Cyclone, Wildcat, and Jayhawk fans, but that's the way it's been. You've been more competitive recently. Of course, Kansas the last couple of years. Kansas State, post Bill Snyder. Iowa State, Matt Campbell, hang on to him. Those are the rankings in the Big 12. The numbers don't lie, but they got to be put into context. And so we've done our best with things like conference winning percentage and some of the other statistics that we've underlined and highlighted and been able to grind down. All right, next up, will it be the SEC? Will it be the Big Ten? The big two are left, and we will get to it right here at the Voice of College Football.